My son slid the papers across the kitchen table and told me to sign on every yellow tab, and his wife smiled at me the way people smile at a child who has finally agreed to take her medicine. I picked up the pen with my good hand and signed each one without reading a word. What neither of them knew was that I had read every page 2 weeks earlier in my lawyer's office in Tulsa, and that page 14, the page they were so sure no one in that room would ever look at, said something different from what they thought it said. I am sitting in a rocking chair on the small concrete patio of Cedarbrook assisted living this morning, watching a mourning dove pick at the dry grass by the parking lot. My name is Marigold Henley. I am 78 years old, a retired county librarian, and until 6 months ago I lived on 160 acres of red dirt and post oak outside Pawhuska, Oklahoma, on land my father bought in 1947 with money he had saved 1/4 at a time. My hip gives me trouble in the mornings, and my left hand has not been quite right since the small stroke last winter, but my mind is clear, and that, as it turns out, is the part that mattered. What I want to tell you about is the afternoon my only son, Bennett, and his wife, Carleen, sat me down at that kitchen table and explained that the land was empty, that it would never be worth anything, and that the kindest thing for everyone was to put it in their names and move me somewhere I would not have to worry about the roof, or the well, or the long drive into town. By the time this story is finished, I think you will understand why I signed every single page they put in front of me, and why I waited 6 months without saying a word, and what a surveyor named Hollis Whitfield found buried under 3 feet of pasture grass on a Tuesday morning in October that changed everything they thought they knew about my father, about that land, and about the quiet woman they had filed away in a room with a hospital bed and a window that looks out at a parking lot. My father's name was Calvin Henley, and he was the kind of man who did not waste words and did not waste motion. He came back from Korea in 1953 with a limp that never fully left him and a habit of looking at the horizon for a long time before he said anything important. He worked 31 years for the Phillips refinery in Bartlesville, and on his weekends he walked that 160 acres with a notebook in his shirt pocket, writing things down in a hand so small I had to hold the page close to read it. When I was a girl, I thought he was counting trees. I learned later, much later, that he was counting something else entirely. He used to tell me, sitting on the front step of the old farmhouse with the sun going down over the western fence line, that the most valuable things in the world are almost always the ones you cannot see from the road. He said it the way other fathers told their daughters to brush their teeth. Just a piece of furniture in the room, said often enough that I stopped hearing it. I did not understand what he meant until I was 68 years old, and an attorney named Pearline Mosley laid a yellowed county document on her desk in front of me and asked me, very quietly, if I had any idea what I was actually sitting on. Pearline Mosley had been my father's attorney before she was mine. Her office sat above a feed store on Kiheka Avenue in downtown Pawhuska, and the stairs up to it were steep enough that I had to stop on the landing and catch my breath before I went the rest of the way. She was nearly my age, white-haired and sharp-eyed, with reading glasses on a beaded chain her granddaughter had made her. The morning I am thinking about was in March of last year, 2 months after my stroke, and I had come in to update my will because Bennett had been pressing me about it on every phone call for almost a year. Pearline poured me a cup of coffee from a percolator she had kept running in that office since the Reagan administration, and she set a thin manila folder on the desk between us. She said she had been waiting for the right time to show me what was inside, and that since I was here and we were already talking about the estate, today was as good a day as any. She opened the folder and turned it toward me. The top document was a deed from 1947, my father's original purchase, and beneath it was a smaller filing dated September 1961, the year I started high school. The 1961 document was a mineral rights reservation, recorded with Osage County, signed in my father's small, careful handwriting, and notarized on a Thursday afternoon in the same week. I remember him taking me out to the back 40 to show me where a covey of bobwhite quail had nested. Pearline tapped her finger on the 1961 page and asked me if I had ever wondered why my father had bought that particular piece of land. I told her I had always assumed he wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere of his own after Korea. She nodded slowly. Then she explained, in the patient way she explained everything, that in Osage County, Oklahoma, mineral rights are a separate matter from surface rights, and that they can be held, sold, leased, or reserved independently of the land above them. She said my father had purchased the surface in 1947, but had spent the following 14 years quietly acquiring the mineral rights beneath it from 3 different families who had inherited them and did not understand what they had. By 1961, he owned all of it, top to bottom. And in September of that year, he had filed the reservation that separated the two forever, nomming me, his only child, as the sole holder of the subsurface estate in perpetuity, regardless of what happened to the land above. I sat in that chair with the coffee cooling in my hands and looked at my father's signature on a piece of paper that was older than my marriage. Pearline let me sit with it. She did not rush me. After a while, she said that as far as the county records were concerned, the surface of those 160 acres and everything growing on it could be sold, gifted, or signed away, and the buyer or recipient would own exactly that, the surface, and not 1 inch beneath it. The minerals, she said, and anything found in association with them, belonged to me, and after me, to whomever I named, and there was no document a person could sign at a kitchen table that would change that fact without my full knowledge and a separate, specific instrument prepared by a competent attorney and properly recorded. I asked her if Bennett knew. She said she did not believe he did, that my father had been a private man about money, and that the 1961 reservation had been filed in a drawer at the county courthouse, where nobody had any reason to look unless they knew exactly what they were looking for. I asked her if there had ever been a survey done on what was actually down there. She said no, not since 1959. I drove home from Pearline's office that afternoon in a kind of quiet I had not felt in a long time. The road out to the farmhouse runs through low, rolling country, all sandstone and bluestem grass, and the sky over Osage County in March is the color of an old washed shirt. I drove slow, both hands on the wheel, and I thought about my father walking that land with his little notebook, and I thought about Bennett, and I thought about how the world had a way of arranging itself when you were not looking. Bennett was 46 years old that spring. He lived in a 4-bedroom house in a development outside Oklahoma City, 2 hours south of me, and he sold commercial insurance for a company that had merged with another company that had merged with a third. His wife Carleen worked in real estate, the residential side, and she had the kind of energy that filled a room whether the room wanted to be filled or not. They had 2 children, my grandchildren, who were now 17 and 20, and who I saw on Christmas Eve and sometimes on a Saturday in summer when Bennett remembered to call and ask if we wanted to drive up for a cookout. Bennett had not always been distant. When he was a boy, he used to sit on the porch with my father and listen to him talk about the Korean winter and about the way the wind moved through the prairie at night. He had loved that land once. Somewhere between his 20s and his 40s, that love had gone quiet, and I had not known how to ask him about it without making him defensive. Carleen had come into our lives when he was 31. She had been polite to me from the first dinner, and she had stayed polite, in that careful way that polite people can be when they are measuring you for something. The phone calls about the will had started about a year before my stroke. Bennett would call on Sunday afternoons, and after asking about my hip and the weather, he would steer the conversation toward what he called planning. He would say that he wanted to make sure I was protected, that he wanted to make sure the estate was simple, that he had a friend in Oklahoma City who was good with elder law and who could come up and meet me at the kitchen table. I had told him each time that Pearline was handling things and that I was satisfied with how they were arranged. He had not pushed exactly. He had just called back the following Sunday and said the same things in slightly different words. After my stroke in January, the tone of the calls changed. He came up to see me at the hospital in Bartlesville, and Carleen came with him, and they sat on either side of my bed and told me they had been talking and that they were worried about me being alone on that land. Carleen said the word isolated 3 times in the first 10 minutes. Bennett said the word liability twice. They mentioned a place called Cedarbrook in Tulsa, which Carleen had already toured, she said, just to know what was out there. She had brought a brochure. I remember looking at the brochure on the rolling tray table next to a plastic cup of ice water, and thinking that my father had told me once that the people who hand you brochures in a hospital room are almost never handing them to you for your benefit. I did not say that. I told them I would think about it. Carleen smiled and patted my hand. Bennett looked relieved, the way a man looks when he has gotten through a hard conversation without it becoming harder. They went home that evening, and the next morning Pearline came to see me at the hospital with that thin manila folder in her purse. Pearline closed the door of my hospital room behind her and pulled the visitor's chair close to the bed. She set the folder on her lap and took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, And then she told me, in the same quiet voice she used for everything, that Bennett had called her office 2 weeks earlier, before the stroke, and asked whether his name was on any of the deeds. She had told him no, that the property was in my name alone, and that any questions about the estate would need to come from me directly. She said Bennett had been cordial on the phone but persistent, and had asked twice whether there were any other documents associated with the property he should be aware of. She had told him the records were a matter of public filing, and he was welcome to look at them himself. He had not asked which county. I closed my eyes for a moment when she said that. Not in surprise exactly, but in the way you close your eyes when something you suspected has just settled into a shape you can no longer pretend not to see. Pearline waited. After a while I asked her what she thought I should do. She said she was my attorney, not my mother, and that what I did was up to me. But she said that if I were her client and her friend, both of which I was, she would suggest that whatever happened next, I should not let on what I knew. She said sometimes the most useful thing a person could do was let other people show her who they were, all the way through to the end, before she decided how to respond. I went home from the hospital 4 days later. Bennett and Carleen drove up to the farmhouse the following Saturday with a casserole dish and a stack of papers. The papers were not the final papers yet. They were what Carleen called a starting point, a draft of a power of attorney and a quitclaim deed, prepared by the friend in Oklahoma City whose name was on the letterhead in small gray print. Carleen set the casserole on the kitchen counter and the papers on the table, and Bennett poured me a cup of coffee from the pot I had already made, and the three of us sat down in the same chairs we had sat in for 30 years of Sunday dinners. Bennett did most of the talking. He said he loved me, and I believe in a certain way he meant it. He said he was worried about another stroke, about a fall, about the well freezing in winter, about the long driveway when an ambulance might need to find me. He said the land was empty, that was the word he used, empty, and that it was a burden to maintain, and that nobody in the family was going to farm it or live on it after I was gone. He said the kindest thing, the wisest thing, was to put the surface in his name now so that if something happened, there would not be a probate fight or a tax mess, and to move me to Cedarbrook where I would be safe and looked after, and where the staff knew how to handle someone in my condition. I listened to all of it. I asked 1 or 2 questions about the medical care at Cedarbrook, the kind of questions a worried old woman might ask, and I let Carleen answer them at length. When Bennett pushed the draft papers toward me, I told him I was tired and that I would like to read them slowly and that I would have an answer by the end of the month. Carleen's smile flickered for just a second before it came back. Bennett said, of course, take all the time you need, and they left the casserole and drove back to Oklahoma City. I took the draft papers to Pearline's office on Monday morning. She read them slowly, page by page, with her glasses down on the end of her nose, and when she was finished, she set them on the desk and looked at me over the top of the rims. She said the documents were what she expected, a power of attorney that would give Bennett broad authority over my financial affairs, and a quitclaim deed transferring the surface estate of all 160 acres to him and Carleen jointly. She said the deed was drafted carefully, with what she called boilerplate language about all rights, title, and interest, the kind of phrasing that sounded total but did not actually reach the separately recorded mineral estate from 1961 unless that estate was specifically named and conveyed in a properly executed instrument, which it was not. She tapped the deed with her finger and said it again so I would remember. The surface goes, the minerals stay. Bennett and Carleen, if I signed this document, would own the dirt and the grass and the post oaks in the old farmhouse. They would not own one molecule of anything underneath. And because the 1961 reservation was already on file in the county records, any title search done before any future sale or development would surface it the moment anyone looked. I asked Pearline what she thought my father had been preparing for all those years ago. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she had asked him the same question once, back in 1978 when he came in to update some paperwork. She said he had told her that he had seen too many families in Osage County lose their inheritance to fast talk and slow reading, and that he wanted his daughter to have something that could not be taken from her at a kitchen table by someone who loved her in the wrong way. Pearline said those were his exact words, the wrong way. She had written them down in her notes because they had struck her at the time. I sat in her office for a long time after that. The percolator hissed in the corner. Outside the window I could hear a truck idling at the feed store loading dock and somebody calling out a delivery number. I thought about my father standing on the back 40 in 1961 with his notebook, planning 14 years ahead of a problem he could not yet see but somehow knew would come. I thought about Bennett at 8 years old, sitting on the porch step next to him, listening. I thought about Carlene's smile flickering at the kitchen table when I asked for time to read. Pearline asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I wanted to sign the papers. She did not react right away. She set her pen down and folded her hands. She said she wanted to be sure I understood what that meant. It would mean losing the surface of the land my father had walked for 30 years. It would mean moving to Cedarbrook. It would mean Bennett and Carlene believing for some period of time that they had succeeded at what they had set out to do. It would mean letting them show me, as she had said in the hospital, all the way through to the end, who they actually were. I told her I understood. I told her I had lived 77 years and I had watched a great many people show me who they were, and that I had learned the difference between the people who would have been ashamed of what they did if they had been caught, and the people who would only be ashamed of being caught. I needed to know which one my son was. Pearline nodded slowly. She said she would have a clean copy of the documents prepared, and that I should call Bennett and tell him I was ready. I called Bennett on a Wednesday evening from the kitchen phone, the old wall-mounted one with the long, curled cord that my father had installed in 1972. I told him I had thought about it, and that I agreed, that the farmhouse was too much for me, and that I was ready to sign whatever needed to be signed. There was a pause on the line that lasted half a second longer than it should have. Then Bennett said he was glad that he and Carlene had been worried and that they would drive up that weekend to take care of everything. They came up on Saturday morning. Carlene brought a different casserole, chicken and rice this time, and Bennett brought a leather portfolio with the final papers inside. He also brought a notary, a woman named Dina from a bank in Bartlesville who he said was a friend of a friend, and who could witness the signatures right there at the kitchen table to save us all a trip into town. Dina was a thin woman with a tight ponytail and a stamp in her purse, and she sat at the end of the table and did not say much. She had a clipboard with a sign-in sheet, and she asked me to show her my driver's license, which I did, and she wrote down the number and the date. Bennett laid the papers out in front of me. There were more pages than I had expected. The power of attorney was on top, then the quitclaim deed for the surface, then a separate document I had not seen before, a transfer-on-death authorization for the small checking account I kept at the credit union, and then a longer document of 15 pages bound with a black plastic clip that Bennett described as a comprehensive settlement of affairs. He said it was standard, that his attorney had recommended putting everything in one package to simplify things for later. Carlene smiled at me from across the table and slid a fresh cup of coffee toward my left hand, the hand that still does not work quite right. I picked up the pen with my good hand and I started signing. I signed the power of attorney on the yellow tab. I signed the quitclaim deed on 2 yellow tabs. I signed the transfer-on-death form. Then I opened the 15-page comprehensive settlement and began to turn the pages slowly, the way a tired old woman turns pages, and I signed every yellow tab I came to without appearing to read what was above it. Page 2, page 5, page 7, page 9. When I got to page 14, I let my hand pause for just a moment, the way it might pause naturally because the pen is heavy and my wrist is not what it used to be, and I let my eyes move across the paragraph above the signature line. The language was careful. It was the kind of language Pearline had warned me to look for. It said that the signatory, meaning me, conveyed, released, and forever quitclaimed any and all right, title, interest, and estate in, and to the real property described in Exhibit A, including without limitation any subsurface, mineral, royalty, or related interests, whether or not separately recorded. I read it twice while I appeared to be looking for the signature line. Then I signed the page. Then I signed page 15. Then I closed the folder and slid it back across the table to Bennett. Carlene was watching me very carefully. Not Bennett. Carlene. Her smile had not changed, but her eyes had gone still, the way a hawk's eyes go still on a fence post when it has spotted something in the grass and is deciding whether to drop. I picked up my coffee cup with my good hand and took a small sip and set it back down. Dina the notary stamped each page with a soft thud, 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 and signed her own name beneath mine. What Bennett and Carlene did not know was that the document I had signed was not the document Pearline had drafted. It was the document they had brought. And the document they had brought was, on page 14, an attempt to do exactly what Pearline had told me a kitchen table signature could not do. They had specifically named the mineral estate. They had tried to sweep it into the conveyance. They had inserted the language into a 15-page packet they assumed I would never read, on a page they assumed I would never look at, on a Saturday morning when they had brought a casserole and a notary and a soft smile, and the promise that everything would be simple. What they also did not know was that Pearline had anticipated exactly this. She had told me in her office the week before that if Bennett's attorney was even moderately competent, he would have advised Bennett that the 1961 reservation existed and that it had to be addressed directly, and that he would draft language to that effect. She had told me that if such language appeared in the documents I was asked to sign, I should sign it anyway, and I should do so in front of the notary they brought, and I should not say a word about it. Because the language on page 14, the language that tried to convey the mineral estate by reference inside an omnibus settlement, was not a valid conveyance of a separately recorded mineral interest under Oklahoma law. Pearline had been very specific. To convey a recorded mineral estate, you needed a separate instrument, properly described, properly identified by the original recording, and recorded in turn at the county courthouse. A buried paragraph in a comprehensive settlement was not that instrument. It was a piece of paper that looked like a conveyance and was not one. And under Oklahoma law, an attempt to obtain such a conveyance from an elderly person in her own kitchen through a packet drafted by an attorney retained by the recipient, witnessed by a notary brought to the location by the recipient, without independent counsel for the signer on a document presented as routine, was something more than a failed conveyance. It was evidence. The kind of evidence that, when laid alongside the recording history, the medical history, and the original 1961 reservation, told a story that any judge in Osage County could read in a single sitting. I did not know all of that at the kitchen table. I knew the broad shape of it. I knew that the page I had just signed was, in Pearline's careful phrase, not worth the paper it was printed on, and that the act of putting it in front of me was worth a great deal more than the paper it was printed on. That was enough. Bennett gathered the documents into the leather portfolio and zipped it closed. Carleen stood up and started rinsing the coffee cups in the sink, the way a person rinses cups when they want to look as though they are simply being helpful. Dina packed her stamp and her clipboard. The whole transaction had taken 35 minutes. Bennett asked me when I wanted to move to Cedarbrook. I told him the end of the month would be fine. Carleen said she would come up the following Saturday to help me pack, and that they would arrange a small moving truck for the things I wanted to take with me. I walked them out to the porch. The April sun was warm on the front step. Bennett hugged me, a real hug, the kind he used to give me when he was a boy coming in from the school bus, and I felt his shoulders shake once, just barely, and I held on to him for a moment longer than he expected. Then he stepped back and would not quite look at me. Carleen patted my arm and told me I was doing the right thing. Cedarbrook sits on a low rise off Highway 75 just north of downtown Tulsa, a long beige building with a circular driveway and a row of pruned crepe myrtles along the front walk. My room is on the east side, on the ground floor, with a window that looks out over the parking lot and a strip of grass, and beyond that the back of a strip mall with a nail salon and a chiropractor's office. The bed is a hospital bed with rails that fold down. The bathroom has a pull cord. There is a small closet, a small dresser, and a chair by the window where I sit in the mornings with my coffee. I will not pretend the first weeks were easy. The food at Cedarbrook is what you would expect, soft and beige, and prepared in a kitchen that serves 200 people at a time. The hallways smell of disinfectant and faintly of the perfume the morning aide wears. The other residents are kind, mostly, and several of them are sharper than the staff gives them credit for. There is a woman 2 doors down named Esther Goldfarb who taught high school chemistry in Tulsa for 41 years, and she and I have taken to sitting together at the small round table by the window in the common room in the afternoons, doing the crossword from the Tulsa world. Bennett called twice in the first week. Carleen called once. The calls were short and bright and full of the kind of cheerful nothing that people use when they are checking to see whether you have noticed anything. I had not noticed anything as far as they could tell. I asked about the grandchildren. I asked about the weather in Oklahoma City. I told them the food was fine and the staff was nice and that I had made a friend. Carleen said she was so glad. Bennett said he would come up to visit soon. He did not come up to visit soon. Pearline came to see me at Cedarbrook on the second Tuesday I was there. She brought a small box of pecan shortbread from the bakery on Kiheka Avenue and a thin folder, and we sat in my room with the door closed. She told me that the quitclaim deed had been recorded the Monday after I signed it, and that Bennett and Carleen had moved fast. Within 10 days of the recording, Carleen had listed a 30-acre parcel along the county road frontage with a commercial broker out of Tulsa, marketing it as undeveloped pasture suitable for light residential or agricultural development. The asking price was $85,000. Carleen was the listing agent. Perline said the rest of the land was sitting quiet for now, but that Bennett had also applied, through his attorney, to have the farmhouse and outbuildings appraised, which suggested he was preparing to sell the home place as well. She said none of this would have been possible if my father had not done what he did in 1961, because right now, if Bennett were selling the entire estate, surface and minerals together, the buyers would be acquiring something I could not recover. As it stood, the buyers would only ever acquire the surface, and the surface alone in that part of Osage County was worth a fraction of what was beneath it. I asked Perline what we were waiting for. She said we were waiting for the right moment, and that the right moment would arrive on its own. She said the 1961 reservation was a fact of public record, and that sooner or later in the normal course of any commercial activity on that land, someone would discover it. When that happened, the discovery would not look like an old woman fighting her son. It would look like a fact the world had brought to light on its own, and that, she said, was the kind of revelation that carried weight in front of a judge and in front of a family. The right moment arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, 6 months and 4 days after I signed the papers at the kitchen table. I was sitting in the common room with Esther doing the crossword when one of the aides came in and told me there was a phone call for me at the front desk from a gentleman who said he was with the Osage County Assessor's office. I walked down the hallway slowly, because I always walk slowly now, and I picked up the receiver at the front desk. The man on the other end identified himself as Hollis Whitfield, a licensed surveyor working under contract for the county. He said he had been engaged by a buyer who was under contract to purchase a 30-acre parcel along the county road frontage of what the records showed as the former Henley homestead. Standard due diligence, he said. He had been walking the parcel that morning with a metal detector and a ground-penetrating radar unit, looking for old well casings and buried utilities, when he had gotten a strong return from a spot about 400 feet off the county road, in a slight depression in the pasture. He had dug down approximately 3 feet and uncovered the corner of what appeared to be a concrete vault, professionally poured, with a steel access plate and a date stamped into the concrete. The date was September of 1961. He said he had stopped digging immediately and called the county, because the vault was not on any plat or survey in the records, and because the recorded mineral reservation from 1961 was now coming up on every title search he ran against the parent parcel. He said the county assessor had pulled the original 1961 reservation document and had found, attached to it in the file, a sealed envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting, deposited at the same time as the reservation and never opened. The envelope was thick. The county had it in their office. They needed me to come in. I stood at the front desk with the receiver in my hand, and I looked out through the glass doors at the crepe myrtles in the circular drive. I thanked Mr. Whitfield. I asked him to please hold the vault and the envelope until I could get there, and to please notify Perline Mosley's office in Pawhuska, whose number I gave him. He said he would do both. I hung up the phone and walked back to the common room and finished the crossword with Esther, because Esther was halfway through 12 down and waiting for me, and because some things you do not interrupt for anything in the world. Perline picked me up the next morning. We drove together to the Osage County Courthouse, the old sandstone building on Grandview Avenue, and we met Hollis Whitfield in a small conference room on the second floor where the assessor had laid out the original 1961 reservation, the sealed envelope, and a folded plat showing the location of the vault. Hollis was a soft-spoken man in his 50s with sun-weathered hands and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. The envelope was opened in our presence. Inside were 3 things. The first was a hand-drawn map in my father's small, careful writing, showing the location of the vault and 3 additional vaults, identically constructed, at points spread across the 160 acres. The second was a single typed page from a geological survey he had commissioned privately in 1960, identifying significant subsurface deposits across the property, including what the report described as a substantial helium-bearing natural gas zone at a depth of roughly 4,000 feet. The third was a letter to me, 2 pages in his handwriting. I read the letter once at the table. Then I folded it, put it in my purse, and asked Perline to call my son. Bennett drove up from Oklahoma City the next morning, alone. Carleen did not come. Perline had been careful on the phone, telling him only that there had been a development on the land that required his attention as the current surface owner, and that the county had asked the family to come in. Bennett had agreed without asking many questions. I think by the time he hung up, he already knew, in the way people know things before they let themselves know them. We met in the same conference room on the second floor of the courthouse. Hollis Whitfield was there, and a man from the assessor's office, and Pearline and me. Bennett came through the door in a sport coat that did not quite fit him, and he stopped when he saw the documents laid out on the table. He looked at the 1961 reservation. He looked at the geological survey. He looked at the map of the vaults. He looked at me, and for a long moment he did not say anything at all. The man from the assessor's office walked him through it. He explained that the surface estate Bennett and Carleen now owned was exactly what the quitclaim deed described, the surface, and that the mineral estate, recorded separately in 1961, remained vested in me as the named reservee, and that the language attempting to convey the minerals on page 14 of the comprehensive settlement was not a valid conveyance under Oklahoma law and would need to be addressed through additional proceedings. He said it neutrally, the way a man reads weather. Then he closed the folder and said the county would give the family the room for a few minutes. When the door closed, Bennett sat down in the chair across from me and put his face in his hands. I did not say anything for a long time. Pearline went and stood by the window. Outside, the courthouse lawn was full of late October light, and a county truck was idling at the curb. After a while, Bennett looked up. His eyes were red. He said he was sorry. He said it was Carleen's idea, and then he stopped himself and said no, that was not fair, that it had been his idea too, that he had let himself believe it was simpler than it was. He said he had told himself the land was empty. He said he had needed to believe it. I told him the land had never been empty. I told him his grandfather had walked it for 30 years writing things down in a notebook, because he was trying to leave his daughter something that could not be taken from her at a kitchen table by someone who loved her in the wrong way. Those were Pearline's words, but they were my father's first, and I gave them to my son in the room where the county had spread out the proof of them. Bennett began to cry then, quietly, the way grown men cry when they have understood something they cannot take back. I did not press charges. Pearline had advised me that I could, and that I would likely win, and I told her I knew. I told her that what I wanted was not a verdict. What I wanted was a son who understood what had been done, and who would spend the rest of his life knowing it. Carleen filed for divorce 3 months later on her own initiative, when she understood that there would be no fortune to share. Bennett did not contest it. I am still at Cedarbrook. I have not moved back to the farmhouse because the truth is the long driveway and the cold well are too much for me now, and Esther Goldfarb is here, and the crossword. The mineral royalties are held in trust, and they will pass when I am gone to my grandchildren, with a letter from me explaining what their great-grandfather did in 1961 and why. My father told me once that the most valuable things in the world are almost always the ones you cannot see from the road. He was right about that. He was right about a great many things. If this story stayed with you, I hope it is a reminder that the people who love us in the wrong way often count on us not to read page 14, and that the people who loved us in the right way often left page 14 exactly where we would find it when we needed it most. Thank you for sitting with me through all of it. If you would like to hear more stories like this, subscribing is the best way to make sure you do not miss what comes next.